Rain glazed the university parking lot in silver, turning the late evening into a restless shimmer of headlights and blurred reflections as Amina hurried down the cracked pavement with her backpack clutched tightly against her chest. Her shift at the campus cafe had ended an hour late. Her last exam had drained the final threads of her concentration, and the thin cardigan she wore did little against the cold drizzle seeping into her bones. She checked her rideshare app again, thumb trembling slightly from exhaustion, and sighed in relief when it flashed, "Driver arriving." She didn't usually treat herself to rides, but tonight the thought of walking 20 minutes through poorly lit streets felt heavier than the dent in her bank account. Scholarships paid her tuition, barely. Rent loomed every month like a quiet threat. Groceries were calculated down to coins. Pride was the only thing she allowed herself in abundance. A sleek black car rolled slowly toward the curb in front of her, engine humming with a smooth, confident power that seemed out of place among the rusty student vehicles scattered around the lot. It wasn't the battered sedan she expected. This car gleamed even under the rain, polished to a mirror shine, windows tinted dark as secrets. She hesitated, heart fluttering, and glanced at her phone again. The license plate matched the app. Another notification buzzed. "Your driver has arrived." The rain intensified, tapping impatiently against the pavement, and she made a split-second decision. Pulling the door open, she slid into the back seat and whispered a breathless, "Thank you," automatically, shaking droplets from her sleeves. The door shut with a muted, airtight thud, sealing her into a world that smelled faintly of cedarwood and expensive leather. Soft amber lights traced the dashboard like a constellation. There was no rideshare sign, no mounted phone with a glowing map, no chatter from a radio. Instead, a man in a tailored charcoal coat sat behind the wheel, posture composed, hands steady at 10 and 2. He caught her gaze in the rearview mirror, his eyes calm but assessing, not irritated, not amused, simply observant. "I believe," he said after a measured pause, voice deep and controlled, "you may have gotten into the wrong car." The words struck her like ice water. "Oh my God. I'm so sorry. I thought." The plate number matched, and the app said, "I didn't mean to intrude." Heat flooded her cheeks as she fumbled for the door handle. "I'll just get out." The handle didn't respond. The doors were locked, though nothing about his expression suggested danger. He pressed a subtle button near the steering wheel but didn't unlock them yet. "It's pouring," he said calmly, nodding toward the rain now cascading down the windshield in sheets. "And this area isn't particularly safe at this hour. Give me your address. I'll drive you home." She blinked, stunned by the unexpected offer. "I couldn't possibly. I don't want to inconvenience you." A faint smile touched his lips, restrained but genuine. "You aren't." Something in his tone, steady, unhurried, eased the panic twisting in her stomach. She hesitated only a moment longer before softly giving him her apartment address. The car eased into traffic with effortless grace, engine barely audible as they merged onto the main road. Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable but charged with curiosity. Amina studied the intricate stitching on the seat in front of her, trying not to stare at the sharp line of his jaw reflected in the mirror. He didn't wear flashy jewelry or display arrogance. There was a quiet authority about him, the kind that didn't demand attention yet commanded it anyway. "You're a student," he observed after a minute, eyes on the road. "Yes," she replied cautiously. "What field?" "Biomedical engineering." She braced for the usual reaction: raised eyebrows, surprised praise, or thinly veiled doubt. Instead, he nodded once, as if confirming something he'd already suspected. Challenging. Necessary. She found herself curious despite her embarrassment. "You're familiar with it?" "I fund research in that area," he said simply, like mentioning he owned a library card. The statement lingered in the air, understated yet immense. She glanced up sharply but said nothing, unsure what to make of him. At a red light, a homeless woman shuffled across the crosswalk ahead, clutching a worn plastic bag close to her chest. Without hesitation, the man lowered his window slightly and gestured subtly to a vehicle that had been trailing them at a discreet distance. Within seconds, another car pulled alongside, and a quiet exchange passed through the narrow opening. An envelope, a nod, coordination without spectacle. Amina watched as the woman was gently approached by individuals who seemed prepared, organized, offering assistance without fanfare. "You planned that," she murmured, astonishment softening her voice. He kept his gaze forward as the light turned green. "I try to plan for the things that shouldn't be emergencies." The statement lingered with her more powerfully than any boast could have. When her apartment building finally came into view, old brick, flickering hallway light, windows that rattled in winter winds, he slowed and parked smoothly along the curb. The contrast between his car and her building felt almost surreal. She reached again for the door handle. This time it unlocked with a quiet click. "What's your name?" he asked before she stepped out. "Amina," she answered. "Daniel," he replied. The name meant nothing to her, but the way he said it carried weight. "Thank you, Daniel. And I'm really sorry for getting into the wrong car." He regarded her for a moment through the mirror, eyes steady. "Sometimes," he said thoughtfully, "the wrong car takes you exactly where you need to go." She wasn't sure what he meant, but the words settled somewhere deep. Stepping out into the rain, she felt oddly reluctant to close the door on that warm, cedar-scented world. The car lingered for a second after she shut it, engine humming softly, then glided away into the night like a shadow reclaiming itself. Amina stood under the flickering light of her building entrance, rain dampening her hair, heart still racing from the surreal encounter. She had climbed into a stranger's car by mistake, embarrassed herself completely, and yet the ride home had felt less like a misstep and more like the beginning of something she couldn't quite name. Upstairs, as she peeled off her wet cardigan and dropped her bag onto the worn carpet, she replayed his calm voice, his measured kindness, the quiet power he carried without ever announcing it. She didn't know who Daniel truly was. She didn't know that the man behind the wheel owned companies whose logos towered over city skylines, or that headlines used words like billionaire and visionary when describing him. All she knew was that on a night when she felt small and exhausted and invisible, someone who seemed to hold the world in steady hands had treated her as though she mattered. The next morning dawned crisp and bright, as if the storm had washed the entire city clean, and Amina hurried across campus with damp hair tied back and her backpack heavier than usual, though she couldn't tell whether it was the textbooks or the memory of the night before weighing on her shoulders. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the amber glow of the dashboard, the steady gaze in the rearview mirror, and heard that quiet voice saying, "Sometimes the wrong car takes you exactly where you need to go." She tried to shake it off as coincidence, a strange but harmless encounter with a wealthy stranger whose path had briefly intersected with hers. But the illusion of normalcy shattered the moment her phone buzzed during her morning lecture. A campus-wide notification lit up her screen announcing a surprise guest speaker that afternoon. Billionaire tech founder and philanthropist Daniel Hale would be addressing students at the engineering auditorium about innovation grants for underprivileged scholars. Her breath caught painfully in her throat as the email loaded a photo beneath the headline. The man in the tailored charcoal coat stared back at her from the screen, looking composed and powerful beneath flashing cameras. The same man who had driven her home in silence through the rain. The same man whose car she had entered by mistake. A murmur rippled through the lecture hall as other students read the same announcement, excitement buzzing like electricity. Amina felt as if the floor had tilted beneath her. Billionaire, founder, philanthropist, words that belonged to a different universe, far removed from overdue rent notices and ramen dinners. She replayed every word she had spoken in the car, every awkward apology, every curious glance. Had she sounded foolish, ungrateful, naive? The memory made her stomach twist, yet beneath the embarrassment was something else, an unexpected spark of possibility. By the time afternoon arrived, the engineering auditorium overflowed with students, professors, and media crews. The air hummed with anticipation, cameras perched like mechanical birds along the walls. Amina slipped into a seat near the back, telling herself she would simply listen and leave unnoticed. She didn't belong in the front rows where confident innovators rehearsed polished pitches and straightened expensive blazers. She belonged in the shadows, she thought, observing opportunities that were meant for braver people. When Daniel stepped onto the stage, the room erupted into applause. He wore a navy suit this time, crisp and understated, yet he carried the same quiet authority she had sensed the night before. He didn't bask in the applause. He waited patiently for silence, hands loosely clasped. "Talent is universal," he began, voice resonant and calm, filling the auditorium without strain. "Opportunity is not." The words landed with a weight that silenced even the whispers. He spoke not about profit margins or stock prices, but about access, about students forced to choose between textbooks and groceries, about innovators whose ideas never left their notebooks because funding was a locked door. Amina felt her pulse quicken, as if he were narrating fragments of her own life without knowing it. He described a new initiative his foundation was launching: private grants, mentorship, direct investment in student prototypes that addressed real-world medical and technological challenges. "If you have an idea," he said, scanning the audience slowly, "even if it feels unfinished or imperfect, bring it forward. Innovation rarely begins polished." Her breath caught at that word, unpolished, and she wondered if he remembered their conversation as clearly as she did. When the speech ended, a line immediately formed down the aisle. Students clutched folders and tablets, rehearsing concise introductions. Amina remained seated, heart hammering. She had an idea: low-cost prosthetic sensors built from recycled conductive materials, but it existed mostly as sketches and scattered research notes. It wasn't presentation ready. It wasn't impressive on paper. Yet his words echoed relentlessly in her mind. Innovation rarely begins polished. Almost without realizing it, she found herself standing and joining the end of the line. Each step forward felt like stepping off a cliff. By the time she reached the front, her palms were damp and her thoughts tangled. Daniel was speaking intently to a graduate student ahead of her, listening more than talking, asking precise questions. When the student moved aside, his gaze lifted and stopped on her. Recognition flickered unmistakably in his eyes. Not surprise, not amusement. Recognition. "You made it home safely," he said, as naturally as if they had parted minutes ago instead of the previous night. The warmth in his tone steadied her racing heart. "Yes," she replied softly. "Thank you. I didn't realize who you were." A faint, almost playful curve touched his mouth. "Would it have changed your decision to get in?" She considered that honestly. "Probably," she admitted. "I might have been too intimidated." He nodded slightly, as though confirming a theory. "Then I'm glad you didn't know." The simplicity of the statement disarmed her. Around them, assistants shifted and cameras flashed, but the moment felt oddly private. "You mentioned funding research," she began, voice trembling only slightly. "I've been working on a concept for affordable prosthetic sensors. They'd use recycled materials to reduce production costs. It's still rough, mostly sketches and preliminary data, but I believe it could make advanced prosthetics accessible to people who can't afford current models." He didn't interrupt. He didn't glance at his watch. He listened. When she finished, breathless and uncertain, he asked, "What problem are you solving first? Cost, durability, or sensitivity?" The specificity of the question startled her. "Cost," she answered immediately, but without sacrificing sensitivity. His eyes sharpened with interest. "Good. Most people chase perfection before accessibility." He reached into his jacket pocket and handed her a minimalist card embossed with a subtle silver emblem. "Come to my office tomorrow afternoon. Bring your sketches. Let's see how unpolished they really are." The card felt heavier than its weight suggested. Amina stared at it as if it might dissolve. "You mean, actually come?" "Actually," he confirmed. The assistant beside him gently reminded him of the schedule, but he waved it off for a second longer. "And Amina," he added quietly, ensuring she met his gaze, "never apologize for stepping into an opportunity, even if it looks like the wrong car at first." Her throat tightened unexpectedly. She nodded, unable to find words strong enough to carry her gratitude. As she stepped aside to let the next student approach, whispers rippled through the crowd. Some curious, some envious. She barely heard them, Her mind raced with possibilities, fears colliding with hope. Just 24 hours earlier, she had been another exhausted student calculating bus fare. Now she held an invitation that could alter the trajectory of her life. The rain-soaked mistake in a parking lot no longer felt accidental. It felt like a door she had opened without realizing it was unlocked.